Hello and a warm welcome to the Open Treasury podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by ctmfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. Welcome to the Leading Practices in Treasury podcast series, a 6-episode exploration of 3 treasury topics based on the second ebook in the professional development series. Created by Strategic Treasurer, a respected treasury consulting company, and CTM File, your go-to source for treasury news. The ebook, also titled Leading Practices in Treasury, is packed with pragmatic guidance and targeted insights into core areas of the treasury function. Listeners can access the ebook or its audiobook version by visiting strategictreasurer.com. Throughout this podcast series, we are exploring the key themes from the ebook. In this 3rd episode, we turn our attention to cash forecasting, a critical function that helps treasury teams improve decision-making, optimize cash and liquidity management, and manage financial risk. I'm Pushpendra Mehta, your host, and once again I'm joined by Paul Galloway, Senior Director of Advisory Services at Strategic Treasurer. Paul, it's a pleasure to have you back. Thank you for contributing your experience to this important discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Push. Always a pleasure coming back here and talking about these important treasury aspects.
Paul, given that an organization's most precious liquid asset is cash, and that Treasury owns it, Treasury teams devote more time to cash forecasting than to any other area of cash and treasury management. So let's begin with the foundational question. What are the types and purposes of treasury forecasts?
Yeah, Push, this topic is really quite important to treasury departments. You're starting to see that, forecasting cash within an organization is taking a higher priority than what it used to. Used to be that they really didn't spend a lot of time forecasting cash at companies. And today there's tools that can help them do that, whether it's AI, machine learning, the use of reporting through a TMS, an aggregator, the use of BI tools to help present information has become more and more important. So when it comes to cash forecasting, what you typically think of is kind of this more near-term to longer-term view. Long-term view for cash forecasting from a treasurer's perspective is, up to 12 months. The shorter term is typically a week to a month, at least a month. You want at least 30 days visibility to cash, but you need to couple that with perhaps a longer-term view as well. Why? Because there's certain types of transactions that reoccur throughout a year. You can count on that you're going to have your debt payments, your tax payments, you're going to pay payroll, you're going to have these certain expenses or obligations out there. Having visibility to that, I think, is really important to an organization, especially when it comes to things tied to debt or dividends for companies that are publicly traded. You need to make sure you make those payments in a timely manner and you have the cash to make it. Not making it can have certain ramifications that are unpleasant for an organization. So visibility to cash, forecasting it, they go hand in hand. Within the organization, you need to think about, who are the consumers of this. Obviously, your treasurer, your assistant treasurer, your director of treasury. These folks are going to want to see cash on a regular cadence. They're going to want to make sure that they know what's going on within the organization, the position, what's coming up. Who knows who's going to ask them a question? It could be the CEO, the CFO, or somebody else within the organization. Plus, it helps them manage that more effectively. Your controller is usually a little bit longer term focus. They're looking out, a year at least. They're like 12 months out. And a lot of that forecast tends to be tied more to the accounting-based things. But from a cash perspective, they do have an interest in what's going on from the Treasury side of things. So there is a relationship there between Treasury and the controller and the company. Another area within the organization where forecasts come into play is around FP&A. Now, FP&A isn't cash forecast, but it's long-term strategic forecasting that they do. It's important to understand what's in those longer-term forecasts because those could be something that comes to fruition down the road. It could be capital needs of the organization. It could be tied to the organic growth, perhaps acquisitions that could potentially occur within a company. So when it comes to cash, it kind of streams across the gamut, and having an understanding of how these three different levels interact and who the players are that are tied to these forecasts, I think is really important.
Well, Paul, that was a comprehensive overview. Thank you so much. Paul, when it comes to cash forecasting, speed is another factor that often comes up. Does it really matter how quickly a forecast can be generated?
Yeah, nowadays it really does. It used to be that organizations spent a lot of time trying to get a forecast on a quarterly basis put in place. And it was typically rolling forecast. It would go out maybe 12 to 18 months, depending on the organization. It depended on who the consumer of the forecast was within the organization. The ability to understand cash position can be really important from a strategic standpoint. Your CFO and CEO may be working within the organization for new products and services. So what's that organic view look like? Do we have cash to be able to effectuate things that we want to do from that perspective to continue to grow the business? Could be acquisitions. What is it that makes sense from acquiring another organization to help the company grow? So I think having the ability to generate cash forecasts on a regular basis and quickly is really important to companies today. So Treasury teams need to have the right tools in place to be able to generate something like that. A lot of time has been spent in the past around the historical data. It's lagging. Many times it can inform what's going on in the future based on a context of the business as it is today and the trajectory of what growth might look like. But it doesn't entirely tell the whole story. If you're just looking at it solely based on data that you have coming in, and the historical data is not cleansed in a manner that allows for good foresight for the future, it could put you outside the realm of what you expect to actually happen relative to what occurs. So understanding how to utilize tools to help you synthesize that data and then being able to detect anomalies and make predictions about what the future looks like will help with forecasting quite a bit. Treasury teams, can find that forecasting is quite time consuming. They're in spreadsheets, they're gathering data, and sometimes they're just not equipped for doing that kind of analysis. They're doing the best they can, perhaps, but it doesn't lead to the informative type of forecast that they need. So increasing the efficiency in cash forecasting, needs to be a priority for an organization. How do you do that? Oftentimes you see organizations that move to a platform like a treasury aggregator or a treasury management system have the ability to synthesize that data further so that you can utilize tools to make better predictions for cash forecasts. You see TMS providers today that actually have tools that are AI machine learning platforms to help them with cash forecasting. It continues to advance. These kinds of tools are going to be really helpful for treasury teams. It's going to allow them to get a lot better at cash forecasting. So generating that on a quick basis, if you're doing it manually in spreadsheets, it's difficult to do it quickly. If you're utilizing tools to automate and to get better detection of anomalies to predict what the future would be like, that's going to help you out a lot more. Of course, the data has to be the source of truth. So you need to ensure that the data that you're utilizing for a forecast is true and correct, and that it's cleansed in a way that's going to be useful for forecasting.
Appreciate your perspective, Paul. Let's move on to a closely related element, cash forecasting accuracy. While treasurers spend most of their time on cash forecasting, many treasury practitioners report significant inaccuracies in their forecasts. Does improving the accuracy of cash forecasting make a noticeable difference to business growth and success?
That's a good question. So, the one thing I always share with people when it comes to forecasting or doing analysis of data is that once you have set your forecast, the one thing you can be guaranteed of is you're going to be wrong. The question is how wrong will you be? So I always like to use the analogy is I want to be in the fairway. Okay, I might be a little bit more to the right or the left at times, but as long as I'm in the fairway, I'm good. If I'm outside the fairway in the rough, that's a problem. And so that's where that level of inaccuracy is. And the problem with being inaccurate is it can be exacerbated over time. It can be more and more wrong over time, which means you have problems managing your cash effectively because you really don't understand what the demands on cash are going to be. Source of cash, use of cash. Do you have the right level of liquidity? Are you going to have the amount of cash that you need to meet the demands? It's really important that you have the right level of accuracy. It doesn't need to be completely accurate. So, right level of accuracy is way more important. Get it in the fairway. Make sure that you have a good comfort level in terms of what that forecast is actually telling you from data that is true, reliable, and cleansed.
Well, Paul, thank you for your discerning viewpoint. Finally, let's talk about elevating forecasting performance. What leading practices in cash forecasting do you advise clients to follow?
We kind of talked about some of these in our prior podcasts, and one area that I want to bring up is around visibility of information. So, visibility to all the transactions, all the bank accounts, all the cash. You need to have visibility to all that. The other piece is you have to have an ability to synthesize the data or clean the data so it will be understandable from a forecast perspective. Being able to get that data into the right mode or the appropriate buckets so that you can use that information to generate a perspective of what the forecast will be is going to be really important. Talking to people within the business, understanding what the controller's looking at, what your FP&A team's looking at from a strategic standpoint, making sure you have visibility to all the obligations of the organization, tax payments, common dividends, interest payments, any type of acquisition that's going to happen, any kind of demand on cash for product and service development. Understanding what those items are going to be. Some of these are going to be occurring on a regular cadence. They're relatively predictable. Some are quite predictable, especially if they're fixed in nature. You can predict that. If it's something that's more one-off, maybe it's an acquisition that's coming up or something around product and service development, you need to understand what that is. You need to get that into the forecast. Being able to utilize tools, artificial intelligence, machine learning, to look at the data that is a source of truth, that's cleansed, looking at those anomalies, understanding what it's telling you, understanding what the business practices are going to be in terms of growth, product and service development, and acquisition, is all going to go towards ensuring that you have a better understanding of what the future holds, what the capital needs are, what the liquidity needs are. This is short-term and long-term. So treasurers today and treasury teams have to have more knowledge about the business than what they used to. It's not just blocking and tackling anymore. It's not just a functional department. Treasury nowadays, I like to look at it as treasury teams that are run quite well 30% of their time is on the functional blocking and tackling, making sure that they're managing payments appropriately. They got a lot of other things that they're doing nowadays when it comes to investments, forecasting in particular, that require time on their behalf to become more of a strategic partner for the organization versus just functional. So I think for our clients that are out there, I always get excited about talking about forecasting, because the fact that they're talking about forecasting is really positive, because it used to be very low in terms of priority. It's becoming a bigger priority for organizations, and for good reasons. If you don't understand your own data, that's a problem. The way you get to understand your data is to work on these forecasts and use tools that can help you.
Paul, I couldn't agree with you more. You've suggested actionable takeaways, which I think will provide a solid roadmap for Treasury teams aiming to improve their cash forecasting practices. With that, we conclude today's podcast. Paul, thank you for your terrific analysis and input. And to all our listeners, thank you for being part of today's conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe and share it with others who might benefit. We'll be back soon with more Treasury-focused content. Until next time, stay sharp and stay connected. Thank you. This podcast is provided for information purposes only, and statements made by CTM File or guests on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, or consulting advice. For more information, visit ctmfile.com.